everyone for joining our Breaking Down Racial Barriers roundtable discussion. My name is Sam Rayner, and I am the Industry Development and Membership Coordinator of the Canadian Independent Music Association, CIMA. First of all, this series is on a national platform with a national audience, and with deep respect, we would like to honor and acknowledge the land we are meeting on is traditional territory of many nations across Canada. Now, just to give you a bit of information about CIMA, we are a national trade association, and we are here to represent the interests of the Canadian independent industry. Our members consist of businesses from all across Canada, such as independent record labels, managers, publishers, recording studios, and anybody else who kind of is in the realm of the independent world. And we represent the industry in a handful of ways: advocacy for the industry, creating export opportunities, and hosting professional development sessions like these. And as a first step to a long road towards establishing an equitable and inclusive industry, this is a series that has been designed for everyone. So businesses, artists, music industry associations like CIMA to listen to and to learn from lived experiences of Black working professionals we work with every day. BDRB is a CIMA project, and it's in joint partnership with Ian and Click, and they've worked tirelessly on programming and ensuring that this format of these conversations address many different difficult intersections of identity. And we cannot have done it without their direction and support. And a big thanks to to CIMA's administrative coordinator, Matthew Baydu, for his assistance with all of the episodes in the entire series. We would also like to acknowledge the funding support of the Government of Canada, Factor, and Ontario Creates. Besides Advance supporting all of these 10 episodes, every week we have an episode partner to listen to and promote these discussions. So for episode 9, we would like to thank Unison Benevolent Fund and Working Culture. And I will now pass it on to Click.
Hey, thank you, Sam. Yes, I also like to say that this roundtable's discussions are being supported by Advance Music, which is the Canada's Black Music Business Collective. You can find out more information about them at www.advancemusic.org. And today's discussion, I'm super excited. If you missed last week, I highly recommend logging on to BDRB.ca. Click on episodes. You can watch all the last episodes that we've been doing over the last 8 weeks. And last week, it was a great conversation, but today's conversation I'm super excited about, mainly because for myself, I've been working in the industry for 20, 30 years and worked at different record labels. And I have a lot of brilliant Black colleagues who have all worked in the music industry, but only seem to reach a certain, cliff point, and then kind of either have to jump off or find other opportunities in the business. And I want to acknowledge and send shout outs to a lot of people in the industry who have Black professionals have been here before us. One of the first people that I actually met that worked at a record label was a gentleman by the name of Tony Sutherland. Salute. I have to shout out people like Michelle Stewart, who, definitely was a mentor for me when I worked at BMG. I have to shout out a lot of individuals who came up working at street departments that used to exist at a number of record labels. Guys like Wisdom Bunadall, Kevin Barton, Kamoya, Jazzy, Michael McLaren, Mary McCollin, Sharon Dowse, Kim Powell, Toa Bear, who else? I could go on and on. There's so many people, and I won't go on and on with it. But I want to salute everybody who's listening and just let you know that you're not forgotten for the contributions that you've put into this music industry in Canada. I'm going to pass off to my man Ian.
So I would be remiss if I didn't shout out Mr. Juan Lucas as well.
Yes.
Okay. So as my partner Click said, welcome to Breaking Down Racial Barriers. This is a 10-part panel discussion on anti-Black racism in the Canadian music and entertainment industry. My name is Ian Andre ESPINET. I am a 25-year veteran of the industry, an entrepreneur with a graphic design background and a entertainment company which has been producing Black music and culture club events, club and concert events over the last 20 years. So as Click said, over the last 9 weeks, we have delved into all areas of anti-Black racism in the music industry, including economics, creative spaces, event spaces. Today, we are going to turn our attention to part 2 of retention and succession and talk about professional advancement and promotion within the industry. If our guests could join us, please.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. And for our live, sorry?
Am I frozen?
Your camera is.
Wait 1 second.
And there seems to be 2 of you on the screen. Oh, there you go.
Yes.
Awesome.
So for our 9th episode, as we discuss retention and succession part 2, we have our first ever all women's panel. This should have been 9 weeks in the making, because as I have alluded to over the 9 weeks, this revolution is being led by women. And yeah, that's all that needs to be said about it. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about, let's have a general discussion on anti-Black racism and the impact that it has on future generations of Black music professionals. I'd love to start by asking you guys basic examples, personal examples of anti-Black racism that you've faced in your journey to the place where you are today. Oh, shoot, I didn't even introduce anyone. I'm so sorry.
He's ready to dive. He's ready to
I'm
dive.
ready to go, ready to go.
Get this started.
All right, let's start with Zoe. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Zoe BADLEY. I'm a digital marketing manager at Universal Music Canada, where I've worked now for almost 6 years.
Okay. KEZIAH.
Hi, I'm KEZIAH Myers. I work for In Tandem, which was a joint venture between SOCAN and Resound to license music users in Canada. And I've been working for SOCAN/In Tandem for 5 years.
Okay. KESI.
Hi, I'm KESI SMYTH. I am the general manager for the 604 label group, which is 604 Records, Light Organ Records, Comedy Here Often, Simkin Artist Management. We're based on the West Coast. And I've been with this group of companies for going on 16 years now.
Wow. Vanessa.
Hey everyone, I'm Vanessa ADORA. I'm the sales and marketing manager at The Orchard. We're a subsidiary of Sony Music Group, and we do independent music.
Okay, and CAREY.
You leave me last for a reason. Anyhow, I'm CAREY Riley. I am a senior marketing manager at Sony Music. I have been in various roles throughout my 20-year history in the music industry, including street promotion, like Click had mentioned early on, as a marketing manager, as a manager of artists, as a club and event promoter as well. So here we are.
Okay. So now we can jump right in. So I'd like to start by asking you guys if you could give personal examples of anti-Black racism that you've faced in your journey thus far. And this is an open forum, so everyone can just jump in and speak as you see fit. All right, CAREY.
Why me? You always want to start with me, huh?
No, I said I left you for last.
Okay. What have I experienced? In various different roles, I haven't seen people move up at the rate in which others in various companies have moved up. I don't know necessarily why specifically, because I've never been given an ultimate reason when asked, when I've inquired, I should say. But I have 100% seen various people in various different roles, go forth, work their asses off, ask for, advancement in companies and been stalemated, or have had to leave companies because they felt as though there was no movement for them because they were constantly challenged with respects to the knowledge that they were bringing to the table or the experience that they had with respects to particular genres of music that they wanted to champion.
Okay. KESI.
Yeah, I think I am the only person on the West Coast here. So I have definitely always felt a bit on my own island. Um, we have, you know, a melting pot here. We're known for a melting pot, but it's definitely a lower population of Black people in Vancouver. And I'm based in Victoria now, so even further west. And um, in my life, I've always been the only Black person in the room, the only Black person in my office, the only Black person in my classes, concerts, events. Most of the time, I am that person. And so, have I experienced anti-Black racism? Yeah, of course. I think there's a bit of a misconception that in Vancouver there's going to be, you know, less racism. But growing up, I remember my dad came home one day with a T-shirt that had been stuck to his car that had a picture of Santa Claus, and he was wearing a hood, and it said "Have a White Christmas" across the top. Um, and I went into middle school with that kind of imagery in my mind. It's been a lot less overt for me in my working career. I don't run into, I don't think that I've missed opportunities in my company or in my, you know, in my work experience because of my skin color. But have I faced microaggressions? Most definitely, all the time, from beginning to end, all the time.
Vanessa.
Yeah, I can echo both of those stories. Growing up, I certainly never had a Black teacher. I was the only Black person in most of my classes, and then into university, I was the only Black person in my year, and I think one of 3 in total in my program over the course of 4 years. I went to Western University, which was a very white school. And I've used that to my benefit, which I think we'll discuss a little bit later. But yeah, in my industry experience, you know, my first year out of school, I was just freelancing, and I think on the ground, it's a lot more diverse. I'd go to shoots and be, you know, the majority in those contexts. But in my corporate experience, I've been the only Black person in my department, you know, maybe one of the only person in sales and marketing, you know, and now I am still the only Black person on my team. So I definitely have that sense of being othered. I've heard racial slurs before in the office environment. I've heard comments about, you know, Black Lives Matter, negative comments about Black Lives Matter that have made me very uncomfortable in the office. Yeah, I think it's just a part of our experience.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused because Click's missing. So my order of operations just got messed up. Who have I not asked? Zoe?
Zoe and KEZIAH.
And KEZIAH.
Yeah, it's the exact same experience across the board. Something that Ebony said on the last panel last week stood out to me. She was talking about the education system in Canada. And so I was born in Guyana, and I came to Canada when I was 6 years old. And immediately they put me in ESL. English is not my second language, it's my only language. So that played a huge role in my development, for sure. I think when your self-worth comes into question at an early age, and when you have white educators who kind of belittle you, or, you know, I would ask, can I go to the bathroom? And it'd be like, no, it's bathroom, and you cannot go until you say it properly. How do you really, as a child, how do you wrap your head around that? And that is perpetuated at every stage, especially as a Black woman. And it's not just, you know, the education system or your workplace. Like, you see it in the medical field as well. You know, I had many experiences with anti-Black racism in the medical field, and it just chips away at you. It just begins to chip away at your self-worth. And so, yeah, getting into your career, I think it definitely played a role into my career and my journey. And the first few years, I just made myself as small as possible because I felt that I was occupying spaces that I wasn't welcomed in. So I just tried to count my blessings that I was there and just keep my head down and do the work. And I think it's taken me a very long time to really recognize all of those little aggressions and try to like work through them, untangle them, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
KEZIAH.
So for me, I would say that I have experienced everything that everybody else has said so far. But I can think of specific situations where I have recognized that I am being targeted or I'm not being chosen because I am Black and I'm a female. I was part of a internship program that was specifically for people of color. I had the top GPA coming out of a white university. I was in Waterloo. And I was offered I was meant to be offered internship positions through the summer. It was a business internship. And I was never offered any of the positions. And at this point, all they have to go on is my GPA, the courses that I'm taking, which was business marketing. And that was similar to all of the other people of color in the program. There were only 2 Black females accepted into the program. And then all of the others were male and received internships every year. And so every year I had to fight that much harder to land a position. And then, like Zoe said, you get into that position and you make yourself as small as possible. But then in making yourself as small as possible, you are not exerting the intelligence that you have, therefore causing them to think that you are not an intellectual. And so it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, but a self-fulfilling prophecy that I didn't put myself in, and that I've been forced into. So there's that. In working in the corporate atmosphere, I have noticed it, and there have been microaggressions. I deal with that on a daily basis. Currently, I am the only Black female at my company. And I also have experienced other microaggressions whereby there's an assumption of music genres that I like. I'm a classically trained musician. I am quite eclectic, but the assumption that you like hip hop and rap, at one point there was an assumption that I wanted to work in a particular department to be closer to the artists, but yet I'm all about efficiencies and operational capabilities. So, you know, just those small yet large microaggressions you take home at the end of the day, and you question yourself and say, should I be, or did I, or, and then now all of a sudden you're looking within yourself and you have to take years of untangling some of those traumas that we've dealt with.
So everyone has alluded to a question. So I guess the question is, how many people like yourself do you see in your respective positions in your companies and as in the field as a whole? You know, in terms of marketing directors or digital content, etc. Everybody can jump in at any point.
The women that I'm aware of and that I've had in my mind, in my circle, are on this call. I have no other reference points, really. When I entered the industry 16 years ago, it was mostly men and mostly white men. And they have given me endless opportunities and advice, and I'm thankful for them and grateful for them. But I did not have anybody who looks like me to show me the way. definitely had to forge my own way. I still do. And I am not aware of anyone, especially on the West Coast, that is in my position.
Asa? Sorry.
I would say same. I work for a collective, and of all of the collectives, I have the benefit of working with SOCAN and Resound for In Tandem. And if I look at those three companies on their own, there's nobody that I see that looks like me. And when I've been working in leadership positions, I was operations lead at SOCAN for the A&R team. It was about forging my own path. And so what I did was I looked to relate to people and women in a different area. I'm a mother, so I was looking for mothers who were executives, and that's how I found my mentors. Outside of that, Vivian Barkley and I, CAREY, who's on the call, those are the two that I've kind of looked up to throughout the years.
Wow. Vanessa?
I work in streaming, and when I started in the business, I didn't know anyone else who was Black, period, working at any of the streaming services. And now that I'm thinking about it, because we're having the conversation, like I know Chantel Noel is now at Spotify, but at one point someone was putting together a panel for young Black artists and wanted me to speak on it, and was like, do you know anyone else who's Black in streaming that can speak on this panel? And the answer was no. Like there isn't anyone who's working directly in streaming or with the streaming services who can speak to this. So yeah, the answer is no.
I'll jump in and say my experience is somewhat different from everybody else, because when I entered the industry, there was some female representation within some of the marketing staff and promotion staff and coordinators, of course, within various companies that I was across. But what I witnessed is the demise of, teams, right, over time, whether that was based off of a lack of a succession plan or just the sheer fact that they felt as though they were being pigeonholed and having to leave the companies. So, I came up in a time where, lifestyle and street marketing teams were at the forefront of like the, consumer-based on the ground marketing and promotions. So those teams were completely compromised of like people that looked like me, that were in my age group. They were led by individuals that were somewhat older, that had experience, whether it was in like DJing or club promotion, or had connections to artists across the country. They had ultimately fought their way into the buildings to get full-time positions to oversee teams that were national. That also led to conversations about who the marketing managers were associated with certain projects and afforded, promotions or hires. But then, there was a light bulb moment, I guess. I call it that, at least, or a light switch flicked. And all of those departments were wiped out. And people were packaged out. Some people left the industry by their own regard completely. And like Click touched on, like, people that held the door open for us, and they were no longer there. And yet and still, even in my experience at one of the majors, which I won't mention, but, I was surrounded by people that I knew their job. And one moment they were there at their desks, and the next day I was the only one that looked like me.
Wow. And so each of you are relatively high up in your careers. And, Click alluded to this earlier. I think, CAREY and others would admit that Vivian Barkley is our highest ranking Black executive, period, probably. Black woman, but Black executive, period. What other gaps do you guys see in the varied roles in the music industry, in terms of publishers to publicists to, to people on the ground in lighting, etc.? But in the varied roles throughout the industry, what gaps do you guys see across the industry?
Well, Jamelia touched on this last week. Her being one of the first Black publicists at a major, and she's how old? This kind of speaks volumes, doesn't it? Like, to know that, you know, thankfully she was introduced to the field by way of like her school having like somebody come in and talk about various roles within the entertainment sector that kind of led, you know, to her further exploring what the industry was about and the opportunities that surrounded. But like, to know that she is maybe one of 2 or 3 at this moment is mind-boggling.
Does anyone else want to touch on that, or?
I mean, you see the same things in promotions. You see it when we look at the agencies. I can't think, and maybe I can think of one Black person that works at an agency where you're booking the talent that's coming into this country, or even reaching out to decide to promote that talent. And so if nobody's in there being able to have that conversation or speak to the experience, then you're going to have 6 of 240 artists that are represented by agencies be Black.
Yeah, so I think a lot of this begins at the HR and hiring stages. And so I guess my question would be, what is the role of the HR departments in terms of recruiting in the early stages, Black talent, and even in their training in anti-Black racism and looking at things from an anti-Black racism lens in that process?
Well, I think exactly that. You have to look at hiring from an anti-Black racism lens. And that means you have to look at your conscious and unconscious biases. Those biases, for me, have showed themselves in the conversations that you have even pre-interview. And I have been on the side of hiring employees. I've also hired. I've been in a position where I've hired interns also. And I make it a point to find something that's relatable. Well, some HR managers or those who are HR or hiring managers don't understand that the relatability at the beginning of the interview sets the tone for the rest of the interview. So if you're talking to me about the cottage, well, that could be an area where this particular Black candidate can't speak to. And so automatically there's a disconnect. And then that disconnect fosters itself throughout the interview, basically in the back of the mind of a hiring manager saying, well, we can't relate. Or the mini-me phenomenon where, oh, I remember that he was like me when, but I'm a girl and I'm Black. So I think that from an HR standpoint, those hiring managers building that conversation and finding something that's relatable, especially in the music industry. I mean, you could talk music. There's something that you can find that doesn't have to set you even further apart.
Yeah, I would add that I think the method of finding interns through school is very outdated, and it definitely keeps certain people out. You're already keeping out people who are going to university who, you know, a co-op is not a part of the program. So you're missing out on that group of people. But more importantly, you're missing out on people who aren't in school, can't afford school, whatever reason. And they have no way of getting, you know, some preliminary experience, because the only way to do the internship is if it's for a college credit. And you know, that's keeping out a lot of great candidates, and I find it personally quite lazy. I think the second point to that in terms of finding, you know, great employees, great Black talent, is that you're looking to your immediate circle to reach out to their friends and family and previous coworkers to find talent. And it's like, you're just going to foster more of the same. Like, these are typically not people, at least in my experience, who really have diverse friends. Like, I've heard in an office environment, like, yeah, I don't really have any Black friends. Like, people straight up say that. And so it's unlikely that they know young, budding Black talent on the rise. You know, a lot of people aren't necessarily connected in the corporate landscape. So I think that process of finding young people has to go. And I think there definitely are solutions that people can speak to of different programs like Remix Project and, you know, connecting with schools in certain areas to get young Black people from a younger age, like before they're even in university.
Yeah, and building off of that too, I find when you look within your own circles and with educational programs and internships like that, you end up also introducing ageism, because there's a whole sector of people who want to switch careers or have never had a door open to them before, that are in their 30s, 40s, that would like to look into the professional lens, not just as, you know, artists, musicians, but there's definitely openings, as we've heard, in publicity and radio and project management and all of these things that other careers could have developed skill sets for. And I very rarely see people entering the industry in later years.
Also add on about the internships and postings, that like they are very outdated, and not just outdated, but the way that things are written, and, you know, like your qualifications and what you have to bring to the table. I think HR departments really need to look at that with a lens, especially when it comes to women and Black women. You know, it's well known, it's been studied, that when men go to apply for a job, they'll look at the 10 qualifications. If they have 4, they're like, I'm qualified for this, let me go ahead and apply. Whereas with women, we have to make sure that we have every single qualification on that before we'll even consider it. So these processes, the qualifications, postings, like everything needs to be really looked at and dismantled, and yeah.
And viewed through an anti-Black racism lens.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you guys identified, you know, how stereotypes and biases. I noticed a couple of you have interesting non-European names. Does that play a role at all, or different hairstyles even in bias and interviewing processes? Have you experienced anything with that?
Absolutely. As someone with a non-European name, I studied sociology as one of my, as a double major in university. So with my sociology hat on, as soon as I graduated university, I was now getting into the corporate world. And I did an experiment. And the social experiment was to use my first name, KEZIAH Myers, on applications. And then I used Sharon Myers, which is my middle name. I sent out 15 different interviews, and I got called back for 10 of them with Sharon Myers and 0 of them for KEZIAH Myers. And I applied to the same places. Yeah.
Amazing.
There you have it. You know, so I guess I want to touch on what the impact of that exclusion is, and what we can do to change thinking patterns and points of views, and basically work experiences for people entering the workforce. Like, what suggestions do you have on how we can, not we, because we're not actually the ones who have the issue necessarily, but how to improve or create access, and what is it that you want to see in the HR and hiring process specifically? An absence of bias, I would assume. You know, and I guess you guys spoke about a lot of those things. We'll jump forward, and I'll ask this. There are very few of you guys in the roles that you play. What would the impact of race-based data be in fixing these issues, if any, do you think?
Well, I think Blackout Tuesday kind of was an eye-opener to some of the conversation about the lack of race-based data. Just even taking a moment, like a step back and evaluating what the landscape and the look of these companies is. I think it's very eye-opening, not only to us collectively who are in those positions, you know, to really see the fact that some of which just didn't even realize, didn't even take a look around to be like, oh, you're the only one. That was super important in some of the conversations that are being had now. Unfortunately, you know, we had to wait to look to people losing their lives and, you know, complete outrage in and around that to, you know, amplify to the extent in which we can go into those rooms and have the hard and difficult conversations about the lack of representation across the board, whether or not you're looking at entry level or executive level positions.
I think recently, obviously, Jessie Reyes called out the music industry, and I think that the kind of data that she presented in terms of the lack of representation at the particular label, for instance, that she called out is indicative of the entire industry, but that without that kind of race-based data, that we won't be in a position to make any conclusions. I've spoken to people at various levels of government and different organizations over the last 9 weeks who have said that because of the lack of data, they actually don't even know the scope of the issue in the industry. And so, you know, to everybody who's watching, I think that one of the critical things that needs to be done in these organizations is an internal audit. You know, but I want to step to recruitment and talk about. Sorry, go ahead, Clint.
Before you go there, can I ask the question: is who do you feel is responsible and accountable for getting that data?
Leadership.
Pardon?
It should be leadership.
So overall, overall in the Canadian music landscape, gathering data that for every sector and ecosystem that we work in, is there a body that you feel should be responsible for that beyond just leadership? Like, is it, you know, are we calling out particular organizations that should actually be funding that? Should ourselves be funding that? I'm just curious.
Well, one of the things that, like in all of the conversations with Advance, right? Why Advance exists and why, you know, we have the ongoing dialogue right now is, you know, the data is not there and we need the research to be done so that way we can hold people accountable, right? And make change. So Advance is one of those organizations that is now seeking out what the real numbers are, right? What does it look like in all different facets of the industry, in all different positions? And then, you know, using that data to have real conversations.
You would think that the funding organizations have a real stake in this as well. If they're going to be pouring money into companies year after year in development, they should know what talent and what inclusion is happening in those companies. I think it should be part of the reporting process. And those numbers should be improving every year. I will say that one concern I have with data-based analytics and numbers is that you end up maybe with companies trying to tokenize Black people and hiring just for the sake of having a Black body in the room. So I would also want to know that development and growth and succession planning is a part of that reporting process. You want to keep Black people growing and learning and not hitting a ceiling within a year when this Instagram conversation runs out.
So let's talk about that for a moment. So you mentioned checking boxes. A lot of organizations are creating diversity and inclusion committees or diversity and inclusion positions. What do you feel is the impact of these things? Are they, do they leave organizations and companies in a position where they can just check a box and do no further work? Or, you know, like, is this a positive step in the direction of change, or both?
I mean, I personally think that corporate entities at the end of the day have to look out for themselves and they have to paint themselves in the best light. So these diversity and inclusion efforts, especially when they're looking to their employees to figure it out, I think is not the right move. I think it's performative. I think you're putting a lot of labor and work on Black employees who were not hired to fix your issues around race and phobias and all of that. Like, you need to hire externally. I think you need to look to people with experience to handle some of these issues, and to have a third party who's a little bit less biased, even though of course they're still going to have the interest of the company. I think that like a lot of Black employees are already underpaid, so to take on more work, more labor, often in a way that still has to be palatable for white people and non-Black people, is very exhausting and draining. And so, you know, I appreciate the people who have stepped up and are agreeing to help with this overall, but I don't also blame the people who have decided to step back and say, you know, your HR, your leadership, like, you guys need to step up and try to help figure it out.
And I think that's a really good, that's a really good point. I mean, one of the first things we had with CIMA, when putting together these roundtable discussions, was speaking with them about their own organization and telling Stuart, like, you know, who runs CIMA, is, you know, it's important that he comes to the table and breaks down exactly what the problems are within his own organization. And I wasn't going to tell him what that was. It's not my job. I want him to step up and recognize what the issues are. And I think that that's something that, as an example of how we need to work with other organizations, is like you said, we're not here to hold your hand. We're here to work with you. But I think it's very important that they are accountable for and recognizing what issues they really have. And of course, you can point out a couple things, but I think that's a really good point.
And people experience retaliation as well, right? Like, even though perhaps it said, like, you know, don't worry, you're safe here. So many people have spoken up about their experience with racism or homophobia or whatever the case. And suddenly, you know, they need to learn how to manage up, and they need to work on their communication skills. And, you know, they're not now in consideration for this promotion. Perhaps they're being pushed out in various ways. So, like, it's not necessarily safe for us to speak up either and to point out these issues. So,
yeah. So, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
From as a business, like Vanessa spoke about, it's in your best interest to hire Black people. It is, you know, statistically, we come from an oppressive background. And because of that, that means resilience, that means robust sense of self, that means growth mindset. These are all areas that will take you from entry level and should get you to CEO succession. Mm-hmm. And so if we're looking even further in the music industry, the culture is very much a Black culture. So you need to infiltrate and do these. You want to create a safe and inviting, inclusive space for your Black hirees or to promote your Black employees. And therefore, this gives you reason to want to do that work and want to make sure that you look further in at how you can better improve so that they don't leave.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So in the last episode, Sorry, Zoe. Zoe, go ahead.
Add on to this, because I think I struggled with this a lot at the start. By start I mean in June, because you do have leaders coming to you being like, we had no idea, and we need help fixing this. And so, you know, as a Black woman, I'm just like, I'm tired. I'm so tired. I don't want to keep discussing this. I don't want to keep bringing up my traumas and to try to figure this out for you. I didn't make the system. Why do I have to dismantle it as well? And so really kind of going back and forth of like, do I have a responsibility here? Do I not have a responsibility? Can I step away? And I think I'm just echoing again what everyone's saying, that these policies really have to be driven by leadership. And leadership has to always hold themselves accountable. Because if leadership isn't held accountable and ensures that these policies are upheld, it will just trickle down and their employees won't bother with it. And that's part of the problem, right? Therefore, we'll just continue to uphold a culture of minimization and compliancy. Yeah.
So I think I'd be remiss, you know, as we have all women on the panel. There were 2 points that I heard brought up, one of which was making yourself small in these organizations, also known as this imposter syndrome thing. But the other one would be the paradigm, and Vanessa mentioned, you know, like these are supposed to be safe spaces, but the paradigm of the angry Black woman. And I was speaking to a friend the other day, and she said to me that, you know, I talked about it in the last episode, where a Black woman enters an organization and is embraced, et cetera, and then found not to fit with the culture, et cetera. But one of the things that I wasn't thinking about was the impact of what happens when you take an issue in a safe space to HR. Have any of you guys had any experiences with racism and what happens when you speak out about it?
I personally just didn't feel comfortable ever speaking out. So, okay. Yeah, and I think that just kind of speaks to a culture of fearing retaliation, or not even retaliation. I think my fear always stemmed with not being taken seriously. Mm-hmm. You kind of relive the event and then have it be questioned. And then you're just like, well, shit, why did I even try?
Yeah.
I can affirm that, Zoe, that would likely happen to you as it happened to me. You know, I did have an experience of racism. I spoke up about it. A racial slur, the N-word, was used. And I went to HR, and someone else, a white woman, decided that this person's use of the N-word was not racist. And then, like I mentioned before, you know, now I have to learn how to manage up. Now I need to figure out my communication skills. Now I need to fix how I am in the office. And a lot of gaslighting took place, and I won't get into those details, but I think it can make you feel completely crazy. Like you feel like you're mentally insane. And to the point of safe spaces, like, to me, if you are truly a diverse environment, if you truly have zero tolerance policies and you're solution oriented, then, you know, those things can be handled properly because you probably have a diversity and inclusion officer, like your HR department has anti-Black racism training and all of these things, but you're not prepared for that. So what you do is performative, and now there's fucking diversity signs on the wall and the pride flag, and it's like, I don't take that shit down. Like, I don't need a diversity sign. Like, I need for people to not use the N-word in the workplace. I need for people to, you know, respect Black artists and Black art and rap and all of these things enough to learn how to pronounce people's names properly. You know, I need for people to look to the Black talent that we do have and trust their taste. You know, I think for me, there was a point in time earlier on in my career where I was like trying to get people to trust my taste. And it's like, you guys don't have taste. Like, I'm the one bringing the taste. Like, that's why you hired me, is because I am a part of the culture. I help inform what people listen to, or I can help inform what people are listening to. I know what people like are listening to, because I'm of the age group and I'm of the culture and all these things. Like, I'm the touch point. So I think I just went a little bit left there, but I'll just affirm that, like, your fear is absolutely fair to have. And in my personal experience dealing with HR, and you know, I don't regret doing that, because I think I needed to have that experience, but it just showed me that, like, you know, it isn't a safe space. You know, they say like diversity and all these things have been buzzwords for the past 5 years or so. And they love to spew that out all day, but in practice and in like the material matrix, it's just not, it doesn't translate.
I'm not trying to steal Ian's job over here or anything, but like imagine those human resources departments that you know, filed your complaint with had a Black person to speak to.
Yeah.
From I've had two instances that I can think of, both under two different leaders. And I can say that the company handled it well in both cases. However, to Vanessa's point, there's an assumption that when the N-word was used, that there's no trauma to the Black person who heard that N-word. And so therefore, if the person still has their position or there is not visible reprimandation that's happening, each time I walk past you, the trauma happens again. The scab is picked off again. And so in one case, the N-word was used under one leadership, and there was diversity training that happened. And then it was, from my perspective, I was educating my management at the time as to why this is a problem. And people were saying, well, that's just how she is. She didn't mean anything by it. But in my mind, I'm like, but you don't realize that each time I walk past this person, that rehashes the instance all over again. Although it wasn't said to me, the point is that the N-word was used. And then second scenario, there was an issue that I felt was just not representative of the company. And I thought it wasn't a good move by a person who was on their personal page doing their own thing, but they have friends within the industry, and we represent at SOCAN, this is where I was, represent 150,000 members. And so at that point, that leader made a change immediately, took action immediately, made sure that there was conversations that were happening, you know, and has since continued to move the needle in these ongoing discussions, really wanting to change the corporate culture.
And that's very necessary. Like when I was speaking to that friend, she expressed to me that what happened in her circumstances, that she filed a complaint with HR about, ironically, the same thing, the use of the N-word. HR brought her in, basically gaslighted her, as KESI has alluded to, and then, in her terms, put her back in the cage with the person who assaulted her in the first place, so that she could work with them, and had to, again, re-traumatize herself every time that she saw them. Ironically, she worked under them, so they mistreated her until she left. You know what I mean? And so this is a paradigm that I'm hearing play out frequently, not just with Black people, but with the Black woman in the workplace. And with that, I'd like to jump to the question of the intersection of sexism and racism, the kind of things that you guys experience as Black women specifically in the music industry, in a very male-dominated space. I'm re-traumatizing you myself, aren't I?
Where do you begin here?
Yeah, Women's Day for me is not enjoyable in the corporate space, because white feminism is prioritized, and without you in the space saying, hey, we should probably have someone who's not a white woman on the panel, so that everyone, aka me, is represented here, it's suddenly just like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. Like, you reach out to, you know, your Blacks and get them in here. And it's just like, I know we're trying to talk sexism here, but I think that like a lot of women try to spin things as like, this is like, oh, you're saying this because I'm a woman, and it's like, well, you're also kind of marginalizing me further as a Black woman. So I know that's kind of left of center, but I think it's important to be said, like, I think in the music industry, from what I've seen, their idea of diversity is having both men and women, but that usually means straight white women. It doesn't mean anything else. Maybe, you know, someone who's on the spectrum or whatever, but, you know, that's their idea of diversity. So people often feel like, oh, you know, we're a great group of women, like, but it's only white women and it's still upholding white supremacy. So yeah, I guess just for me in my experience, yes, of course I deal with sexism and there's instances of that happens all the time, but I've experienced a lot of racism from white women in particular. So yeah.
And to add on to Vanessa's point of like with white feminism, if you bring up that intersectionality of, you know, we should also look to this other side of it. It's kind of, I've been told in the past where, yeah, that's a really good point, and it's on our list. Like, we're going to get to that
on the roadmap.
Yeah, exactly. But what does that mean? And then again, you now feel it brings you back down. It chips away at your self-worth because I'm not being prioritized here.
Yeah, and you know, sorry, did anyone else want to touch on that?
I think that just what like Vanessa had said and Zoe had said is, if you continue to repeat the things that you are like addressing, sometimes they're labeled just because you're feminine, emotional. And, you know, you remove yourself from the conversation after being called emotional and do that self-evaluation and being like, but wait a minute, I wasn't raising my voice. I didn't, you know, act in a certain way or use any type of like body language that would suggest that. And then you distill it and you're like, oh, because I'm a woman, right? And then you know of other conversations that are being had by your male counterparts that, you know, maybe disagreements or whatever, whatnot, and they get, you know, flaily and, you know, raise their voices and all of that. And yet and still they're not emotional or they're not aggressive or, you know, so those things definitely across like the various things that Zoe and Vanessa have already flagged definitely play a role in, you know, how things are being treated as well by both the male and female counterparts at, you know, the executive levels.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'd be remiss if, you know, Vanessa touched on this, but I think the irony isn't lost on me that advances that are made by Black women are the ones that advance all women and all men after that. So where Black women go, everyone else is now free to go. You know, like when a Black woman opens a door, that opens the door for an Asian woman, a white woman, a Black man, a Martian, everybody, right? And so I don't think that you were too left of field on that, Vanessa. You know, so let's talk about retention, because obviously all of these things play a role in the reason that some of our best and most talented individuals leave the industry. There seems to be a revolving door with Black professionals in the Canadian music industry, like coming in every, maybe what, 10 years, Carey? From all aspects, from event producers to label execs and all points in between. So, you know, I've been saying like real talk, straight talk, bad manners. Why are Black music professionals quitting? Like, why are we leaving the industry en masse most of the time?
I think there's various reasons. One of them that comes immediately to mind is getting tired of fighting the fight. Like, you know, whether you're asking for a budget to be initiated against something that you feel passionate about, or just, you know, trying to have a conversation about something that should be prioritized in general, you know, having to justify that and then go back and justify that and then go back and justify it and then find a colleague that, you know, is on the same page as you to help co-justify it. And then finally, you know, being told at the end of the day that, no, it's not a priority, or things have changed, or timelines are too far gone to proceed with said ideas. I think that plays a definite role. And then especially when you have people in, you know, the positions of promoting other people that just don't understand the culture and, you know, don't speak the language. And then, you know, assume that you're not as experienced as you are within what you're suggesting or what you're working, has its negative effect on whether or not somebody wants to ultimately be in the situation to deal with that day after day after day after day.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also add that I think some of it is financially.
That too.
I think there's a definite financial barrier that happens within Black professionals. They work somewhere for a while. Obviously, you want to, up the money and get the bag, and as you're going up that ladder, if you're not getting that raise or not getting that promotion and you got a family to feed, you know what I'm saying?
Which is especially difficult for Black women who already are facing a discrepancy for gender pay, and now we're also facing a discrepancy when it comes to race. We're also raising families, and there's a lot of barriers to face there. I think also there's a real lack of infrastructure 360 in the music industry. Often, Black people are promoting and marketing Black music. There is not a lot of leeway for Canadian Black music anywhere in this industry. There's just not the radio support. There's barely any publicity support. Funding support is low. So when you are facing so many extra barriers to just being a Canadian musician, but now you're a Canadian Black musician trying to be promoted or managed or marketed by a Canadian Black person, there are just so many walls in your way that eventually it wears you down. Like, there's only so many kicks at the bucket before your pay inequity and your barriers become too much.
And then there's invisibility, and kind of to combine both KESI and CAREY's points. You are in a position where you're not seen, so you're working 10 times as hard as your coworkers, and then you present and you do a lot of work to present what you need for a budget, and you're still not seen. And then as you go and find other allies to help you, you realize you're basically wrangling the entire company to come behind you so that you can have a budget passed, or so that you can move forward with what is definitely an intuitive and productive idea.
Autonomy is extremely important. I think that is one thing that is definitely missing. It's not just about diversity hires and promoting Black people. If those promotions and hires do not have the autonomy to make decisions and sign off on budgets, then it's just for show. What's it for? If I have to go and seek approvals by 4 different higher ups that are all white, then what does my voice matter here?
Well, having to explain it to them in a context they can understand every single time. Whereas if there was someone that looked like you, we can have a conversation and move forward, and it would take 2 sentences.
So, I mean, there's obviously pay discrepancy between yourselves and your male counterparts. I'm intrigued by the idea, obviously, that you guys are a double whammy. My friend said the only thing that would be higher up on the rungs of inequality would be to be a Black woman, LGBTQ, and handicapped. You know what I mean? Like, you guys are on the highest rung. I think someone said the other day, and I think it is probably the most true statement that I've heard in a while. I don't think that there is any human being on the planet that is more mistreated than the Black woman presently. And this sees itself into the roles of these things. And I think so we need some sort of audits even within these companies of yourselves and your peers to see what the discrepancy is in pay. And I think that should be a first priority of all of these organizations and corporations. So let's take a second to step to the role of the makeup and the boards of directors, and what role that this plays in diversity and getting people like yourself into the industry. in your experience, have you seen a lot of people of color? Actually, I'm not even speaking of people of color because there's an issue in conflating Black issues and people of color, but Black people in boards of directors and higher ups in these organizations that create a trickle down effect?
Again, no.
In Barclay.
Vivian, we had Michelle Stewart. I'm at a loss.
Okay, and so I think that allyship, and I don't use the term. If you've been watching the episodes, you've heard me say numerous times, don't call yourself an ally. We'll tell you when you're an ally. But what role do non-Black people of power in these organizations, boards, and corporations play in mentorship for the next generation of Black professionals? Like, what can they be doing to assist you guys in getting to the next level of your careers?
I'm not seeing people of color in senior positions, really. Maybe I'm missing something, but who are those people? Like,
I feel lucky to be in the position I'm in because I work for an independent group of companies. We're not a major, and I'm happy about that. It's allowed me to grow and develop in this company and to have a close relationship with my boss and my coworkers and my peers. And it's allowed me to develop. And so I don't feel there's a ceiling where I work. And in the last 2 years, they've helped me sort of develop into what I am now, which is in a position of power. I am the general manager and I work in HR, so I'm now able to start making changes. I sit in sort of a management situation where there's a few voices, and we've attempted to make that as diverse as we can with what we have right now. And we can make changes on our feet. So when we know something's not working, I can go and speak to them and have an open conversation and hard conversations. And I don't feel the fear of being fired or having some sort of retribution for that. I feel I have a voice now, and I feel like now is the time when I can start using that to help other Black people at some point get into my position. So I think now it's on me to be looking to mentor other people that I can help bring into the industry or, give advice to where they want to go. But that's within my group of company. We're independent. So I think we need to be seeing that at a much bigger level. And like I mentioned earlier, there's a huge infrastructure that is not working, that doesn't have all of these doors open. And it's not just, an independent label in Vancouver. It's the Universals and the Sonys, and I can call them all out because I don't work for you. So, these big companies, Ontario-based companies, the funding organizations, the booking agents, the radio stations, like we need to see it at all levels, and we need to see development for it to actually be sustainable.
Beyond just the Ontario companies and the big companies, do you feel, what about calling out the people within your own market, like being Vancouver, for example? We know there's Black people that live there.
Yeah.
I've been to the parties, I've been to the clubs, I've been to the concerts, and I definitely know that there's artists and people that want to be in the industry. So the question is like, what about the other spaces?
Yeah, we need to be responsible for reaching out into those spaces and getting out of, that we were speaking earlier about sort of hiring within your group of people, internal hiring. We need to be reaching outside of that and looking for people who are not similar to us. That's how we get a variance of voices, all kinds of voices, Black voices, LGBT voices. It all needs to be, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to reach outside of yourself to do that. And, in Vancouver, it's difficult. It's a kitschy little town, but there's definitely a crowd here for it and definitely a business for it. But once we do that, once I reach out and bring people into my circle and mentor them, I need to be able to send them somewhere. There has to be ears and opportunities for them to grow beyond just Vancouver. I think most people see a ceiling there. And if we're talking about global, even more, you know, if we want to be on the same level as other corporations in the US and in the UK and elsewhere, we need to be opening the doors in Canada and giving funding and infrastructure for their careers to grow.
Yeah. So, you know, while hiring and onboarding and development are a huge part of this process, as you're saying, KESI, if moves aren't made to retain people and create roles throughout the pipeline, then it's completely fruitless. In other words, right? So what would you like to see these companies doing in terms of professional development and filling the pipeline towards senior leadership, in your personal opinions?
I mean, I can speak to that a little bit. I'm feeling really fortunate in my current position. I feel like I'm being set up for success and I'm being invested in. I feel like I'm being valued. But I would say that simply investing in your young Black talent is key. If they want to take a class, if they want to do a certification, even if they want a degree, like if you're able to help facilitate that and you truly feel like you can go to bat for that person and trust that that person will fulfill on their promise, then I see no reason in trying to support. I know that a lot of the structures for education and professional development in that way is not very significant overall. Like, you know, if someone wants to take a class, I think that's great. But if they want to move beyond that and you can find ways to support something that's really tangible, something that can go on their resume and help them succeed and build those leadership skills, do that. You know, if you see that a young Black person is you know, very invested and passionate and smart and promising as a future executive, like help mentor them. You know, now I do feel like in my current role, I have leadership who teaches me things beyond my actual position. Like I feel like I'm being set up to do something bigger and something greater. And if you're able to help facilitate that in your most promising young talent, I think that's a very easy way to do that. It's a start.
SOCAN has a secondment program, and I think it's incredible. Since being within the SOCAN group, I had the opportunity of taking on secondments, which allowed me to learn even more about the industry and even more about the business as a whole. And it also showed that my managers were invested in me. I have a manager now who is extremely supportive and really prides himself on career development. Like that's what he likes to do. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Vanessa, similar to you, I have been really lucky to have a manager who will talk to me and is preparing me. And at one point had to say, okay, you can stop overworking, we see you. What that does mean though is that hopefully there are more like him, because if he's setting me up for success, well then where's that opportunity coming from? And if that opportunity does arise, is somebody else going to see that Black excellence within me? I also am very lucky to have conversations with our CEO, and she has been someone who I've looked up to throughout my entire career. So it's how is it that we take those people and their core values and disperse that across the company?
So you touched on something that I actually want to hit click with, you know, where you had, Click, you had talked about the idea that that every time that your sponsor left the company that you had to reprove yourself. Did you want to touch on that?
I don't think that was me that said that. It was actually, it was Carey that said that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That was our conversation the other day.
Yeah. But Carey, touch on, if you want, do you feel comfortable touching on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I like during my time at Universal, in the first few years that I was there. I was brought in by a female leader who was pregnant at the time, and she went on mat leave within the first 3 months of me being on the ground. On her return, like while she was away, I reported to somebody new, obviously, for that year. When she returned, I reported back into her for maybe about, I'd say 8 months or so. And then she moved into a more senior role by way of the distributed labels. And then I was shuffled onto somebody else, and resided with that person for maybe about a year. And then from there, there was restructuring done. And yet again, here I was left to report to somebody else. So every time that there was a conversation for, evaluation or improvement or, courses or any type of succession plan, it was always year after year, starting again with somebody new who had to be familiar with my work ethic, just the interactions that I was having amongst, the internal team and the external teams, and just, a reintroduction of sorts. So it never afforded me the opportunity to really show and prove year after year of who I was, what I was doing, the successes I had underneath my belt, the experiences that I had before feeling as though I needed to leave the company.
I would love to hear, kind of adding on to the question that Ian was talking about in terms of like what things can be done.
Well, I think HR plays a role in that, right?
Yes,
like,
but also
HR didn't change while I was there.
Also, what KEZIAH was saying in regards to like having the right person who actually had an investment in you helped. So how do you advise when that you have somebody who's not the right person? When you know that your boss is not the right person, like you dealing with multiple people and you knew that this was going to be a challenge. For me, in my time at Universal, I've basically, I'll never forget when I started my management company, was me walking into the president's office and the president not realizing like all these achievements that I had done within my department, all these acts that I had brought to the table and had no idea I was the one that brought them to the table. Do you know what I mean? And I realized that was a learning experience for me, is that I always felt like there's a protocol, and I thought that maybe my boss or somebody would have my best interests at heart and share my successes with the rest of the company. But what I've learned from that is you got to toot your own horn everywhere you can. And I think as Black people, we really got to toot that horn, because if we don't have people that are really, from the culture, looking out for our best interests, who is?
Mm-hmm. So as an outsider to this conversation, because I've been self-employed for 20-something odd years, since a teenager, Click alluded to something that I have a question about. And that question would be, and then I want to get back to KEZIAH, and talk more about career development. But have you guys experienced people taking credit for your ideas, or you not getting... the faces are priceless, or you not getting credit for things that you have brought to the table? We talk about playing small. Is this something that you guys have experienced in your tenure in the music industry?
So I was going to touch on it when we were talking about sexism, and then we kind of went all over the place. But that is probably the biggest thing that I ever experienced. When I first started out, I am pretty timid. I don't speak up a lot. I like to kind of just mull my ideas over, and then leaving a meeting, I will share them with the product manager. But I found if I did those things, a male would take credit for the work that I've done, or the ideas that I've come up with, or because I didn't feel comfortable speaking up in a meeting, they'll just speak on my behalf. I was lucky to have a female boss who she recognized that, you know, maybe I don't feel comfortable speaking up just yet. So she would, when I would share an idea with her, instead of taking that idea and speaking on my behalf, she would throw it to me in meetings. And I think women understand that and they have that empathy, whereas men kind of lack that a little bit. So to them, they're like, well, you don't feel comfortable speaking, so let me just speak on your behalf, it's fine. But they don't realize, like, you're kind of taking my credit, you're not actually helping my development in any way, shape or way. Yeah.
So Click, you had alluded to, you were asking a question before I kind of jumped in there. What was the...
Yeah, I just wanted to hear from everybody in regards to your recommendations in regards to how can people, like, how can we handle the lack of invested leadership in spaces? How, like, what is, because that, to me, I feel like that is part of the issue. If we're not moving up a ladder, it's maybe because the people that are in position have no vested interest in us moving up a ladder.
My boss taught me something really important really early in my career that stuck with me. He said, squeaky wheel gets the grease. So you got to do it for yourself. If someone is not doing it for you, then you need to leave and find a place that will support you and do it for you. If it's not there in management, then it's not going to be there, and they don't deserve you. Like, I think we need to sort of forge our own trails. And if we're picking companies and organizations and management teams that do support us and do invest and put their money where their mouth is and develop, then those organizations are going to flourish and everybody else is going to have to follow.
Carey, do you feel like organizations like Advance could be an advocate organization that might help Black professionals in positions that might be having that problem, and what might that look like? Like, I wonder if that's another way. How do you deal with the systematic issues? So who's there to help us when there's nobody there? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that definitely, yes, is the answer to that with respects to Advance. Let's even look at most recent conversations about, you know, categories at certain award shows, right? Where the dialogue has been going on for years, and Advance as a collective representing, you know, industry professionals across various corporations had a conversation to be like, this is a problem, this needs to be addressed. And then, you know, documentation that was provided a year or so ago was resurfaced to the top of the pile, right? So I think that having a collective voice is super important, and Advance being that collective voice is super important in the time that we're having. But I also kind of think that what you said earlier too about having the confidence of having the conversations with the senior leaders in your companies and tooting your own horn is 100% necessary while the other conversations are being had.
Is there any other companies besides Advance that you think could be an asset? Not just from a label standpoint, it could be working in booking agencies, it could be working at media companies. Like, we all know there's a lack of places everywhere. So I just wonder if there's something we should be pointing out and calling out that, hey, this is also your job. I'm just curious.
But I said not top of mind for me. I don't know, KEZIAH, if anything's coming to your mind on this.
There is, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I guess it would fall in this category, but there's C, which is the Center of Young Black Professionals. And they make it a point to do mentorship and training for young Black professionals. Now, when I say young, it does start at high school, but then goes to your mid-20s. So that gives you the training and acumen of something as small as small talk, you know, understanding what that looks like and how to navigate in corporate spaces while also giving you the confidence to toot your own horn.
Okay. So we've discussed ongoing training. We've discussed mentorship. We, to some extent, have expressed that organizations need some sort of community engagement and development. strong onboarding and training programs. Have any of you guys, KEZIAH mentioned secondment. Have you seen any organizations creating initiatives to pair employees with mentors or sponsors who they can meet with regularly to discuss their career trajectory or their professional development, and resources, and when these things are available, how supportive are these organizations in allowing you guys to take time away from your daily jobs to take advantage of these kind of opportunities if they exist at all?
I mean, nothing. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, go ahead, Vanessa. If you've seen, I was going to say I haven't.
I mean, the Orchard is great. They set up like executive coffee chats. So I think it's monthly. You can sign up to meet with an executive somewhere around the world, and like in small groups, you'll be able to ask that person questions and just get to know them. And the company is fairly like flat in terms of communication and things like that. So I feel pretty comfortable reaching out to people. We work like very globally, and I can talk to people. I've talked to people in the Nordics and the UK and just all over the world just to like get to know their market, or we even do market territory presentations where you can just learn about how that market works. And I think that helps globalize your experience a little bit. I don't think there's anything formal specific to mentorship, but I think our diversity initiative internally is working on something like that. So
that's a great initiative. Do you guys have any other suggestions in terms of what you would like to see in these organizations, or suggestions to the powers that be that are watching in terms of initiatives that they could be taking, for individuals like Zoe or Vanessa or any of you? Well, obviously you guys have stuff at the Orchard, but that could assist anybody here in advancing.
I think the promotion of the resources that HR holds. So Vanessa was recently talking about, if you want to take a course or if you want to complete some schooling. Well, a lot of these corporations, they do have funding for that. It just ends up being on a need to know basis, or because you haven't had the right conversation with the right person, you don't know that that's available. I know that I have been able to get a professional designation just because I went to HR and said, hey, this is what I want to do. This is how it applies to my job and making me a better employee. And there was no hesitation. Actually, there's a program around it. So I wasn't asking them to come out of pocket for something they've never done before. So I think that promoting those resources is good. And I think also recognizing that those who are Black coming into the organization may not know that they can ask or what to ask when they're looking for upward mobility or the tools that they need to be successful within an organization.
Okay.
Yeah, I think for like leadership, leadership needs to actively listen to their employees and commit to taking action. And so I think part of that is communicating what can and what cannot be done to meet expectations, and also then committing to it. Without the commitment, don't expect your staff to remain engaged. And I think this is why we've seen so many times where people just jump ship, because the commitment from your leaders aren't there. And I think leadership also needs to provide feedback as well in order to stay engaged. Like, I need to learn from feedback, both positive and constructive, on a regular basis, and to feel encouraged and empowered by leadership.
Okay. So I think myself and Click, oh, happy birthday, Click. Myself and Click are probably the elders on the call, as I've been in the industry since my teen years. A lot of the conversation surrounds young people in the industry. But there's not a lot of conversation about the ageism, and I know somebody touched on it right as we started the episode. But I noticed that there's a tendency for white executives in their 60s and 70s to still be able to get jobs. They seem to move around the industry from organization and corporation to corporation, while in our segment, quote unquote, of the industry, the black executive game seems to be a young person's thing. Can you guys, speak to ageism at all?
I think KESI kind of touched on this earlier on too, about using your resources or your contact circle in bringing people on board at the various corporations. It's like, an executive will look within his contact list and make a recommendation for somebody that he knows, right? Or she knows. So, the lack of representation at those levels obviously plays a factor when we're talking about bringing in people at that level, because the contact list may not necessarily include the diversity that we would hope to be included. Overarching things like with respects to the intern programs and facilitating upward movement within those groupings as well, like, entry-level positions from people that have volunteered or want to be associated should also be considered as part of the conversation in and around opportunities. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. More times it's not, because contacts and resources are pretty much what you know. So you see it. The older people that have been at, whether it's, Warner moving to Universal or Universal moving to Bell, or, it happens all the time.
So, but I also think that the ageism thing is very much a black problem, because I've seen white individuals who are in 40 plus seem to get in no problem, but it is an area that we have to address and really take a look at and realize and encourage people that, like, especially today, especially right now. The reason why I say especially right now is because of COVID. I have a bunch of friends that have been let go of their jobs, and they're like, hey, I'm trying to find something. And, some of them have a lot of great skill sets that they might have learned somewhere else, and now they want to go into the music business some way or another. But, they might be in their 30s, it might be in their 40s. And I have to tell them, like, hey, it might be real challenging for you. But, I think it's all about encouraging not just ourselves, but encouraging other people to look up and beyond a young intern, or like, because you might find somebody who's in their 30s who's willing, just hungry to get in and willing to do it at a lower price, or whatever the case may be, fee or whatever, or salary, whatever. But yeah, that's my two cents.
I think there's a financial issue there where someone in their 30s or 40s may not have the means to take a break from work and do an internship or mentorship. There should be some funding to allow for people who are not already enrolled in a university program to be paid to do these interactions, to come in and either intern or do some form of work and experience. It doesn't seem to be an option for someone who's maybe a single parent or is wanting to change careers. There just isn't right now. I don't know, at least in BC, there isn't a program set up to cover their basic living expenses while they forge a new career.
Last week we did have, was it last week or the week before, we had Bushra, who was on and spoke about her program through OAC, which is a professional development grant that gives, I think it's like $7,500. It can go towards like working with a mentor. It can go towards flight and stuff like that. And I do know that there is a grant through Canada Council that the only problem with this grant, and this is something I feel like that doesn't really exist, and putting it out there, is it's a grant that's kind of geared towards people in the performance theater management area. So like if you were trying to get mentorship in that arena, you can get up to like, I think it's like 20 or higher to actually pay your mentor and also offset some of your costs while you're learning in that space. So maybe that's an idea of something where it's like, you know, there's a grant or a bursary or something that is set up where somebody can learn and be align directly with a mentor of some sort. You know what I mean? Just some ideas. I think these are things that we need to start thinking outside the box of what already exists, that doesn't exist, that will actually benefit us moving forward. And yeah, I would love to hear if you guys have any ideas like that yourself.
I mean, I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of these old guys retiring, and I'm personally looking forward to that. I think that no, seriously, I think it does relate to retention as well. When I started in the field, I was the youngest person at the company, and then as I went along, among the youngest people there, and so it's difficult for me to stay inspired when I'm looking to leadership who is 50, maybe even 60 plus, who is not in tune with the digital era, not in tune with Black music, Black culture, popular culture really at all. I know that ageism can kind of go both ways, and we are in an industry with a younger demographic, but I think that's still slowly shifting in the Canadian industry. We see a lot of older people who aren't necessarily connected. And so it does play a role in retaining young talent because, you're inspired by people who aren't in the you're not inspired by people who are in the building or by your direct leadership. So you don't really aspire to be in their role or to be like them. So you don't care to necessarily stay. And you want to find an environment that's maybe a bit younger and hip.
So again, we've spoken about ageism. My experience in the industry is that I just noticed that white men seem to just fall up into positions. They just automatically move from position to position. I don't know how we change that paradigm so that it includes everyone else, so that the natural progression for Zoe or for Vanessa or KEZIAH, or KESI, whomever, or CAREY, is that you automatically go from junior to senior to this to executive, and then I guess my next question would be with respect to ownership and the other side of the question, which is our goal is to see more successful Black music executives, but it might not just be enough to encourage us inside the organizations and the companies. What are your thoughts on externally encouraging Black people to become leaders of their own companies, creation of their own companies?
It's so very important. Even if I'm thinking of just the day-to-day stuff that I deal with from marketing, we're constantly looking for somebody that's got their finger on the pulse, that's buzzing, without finding a better word to explain it, that we could maybe essentially work with by way of an agency agreement or contract basis, so it's super important for, those that are entrepreneurial to take that step forward and start building a name for themselves, because corporations like the one that I work for now and the ones that I've worked for before always kind of look to how can we reach certain audiences, and if there's that specialty, there might be a way to bring them into the fold by way of whether that's a limited contract or more of a full-time capacity.
Okay. So I think we've basically circled the gamut of the things that are causing Black people either to not stay in the industry due to feelings of not being valued, not receiving advancement. We've talked about ageism. So I think ultimately, it is a question in this area of ongoing training and mentorship and onboarding in HR departments and anti-Black racism training and race-based data and internal task forces to review where we stand, and the establishment of dedicated, equity and diversity aims within the business structure, and things to advance Black executives across the entire industry. including equal pay and mentorship. I guess in closing, I would ask you guys, what do you feel is the biggest barrier to the creation of the next generation of executives, not the entry level, but the next level of executives in the industry, and what suggestions and things would you like to see? What needs to be done by the people who have the power to change it? We'll start with KESI.
It's tough if you don't currently have representation. You need to invite voices to the table to grow and change your mind and change the forward path. So I would say that they need to seek advisors, go into the communities, speak with Black people in Black communities about what is necessary, invite them into the table, and pay them equally. I can't really think of another way. You just need to invite Black voices to those executive tables. It's really easier than it's made out to be. There are many Black executives out there. There are many, Click was talking about Black people who may have lost jobs due to COVID, who are in professional careers that may have transferable skills. They are out there. We all know them. They just need to be invited to the conversation.
And I think a part of the invitation is also trusting the Black voices that are within the companies that already have those roles. Not questioning necessarily, but inviting the conversation amongst the employees that have resources and contacts across industries to make recommendations that are actually heard, because that could lead to more of us within those buildings.
And I think sponsorship is huge as well. If you're not able to necessarily mentor somebody, like I've had various opportunities come up because someone has said my name in a room that I wasn't in, just because they saw it for me, whether or not we were at the same company or had conflicting interests or whatever. They just support me and they see me as a potential great candidate, as a future executive, and so they bring my name up. I think that's like such a valuable way to help people.
I think that internally it's about creating that mentorship where you are taking the Black employees you already have and creating roadmaps with them for success into executive positions. And then you'll create a cycle where you're bringing ones in entry, but then you're also promoting those that are mid to high, and then you get ones that are high, and then this will create a cycle that will continually bring in Black people and Black excellence, of course, into your company.
I think that companies and corporations have just been complicit, kind of just like buried their head into the sand, and leaders and managers need to be a part of their teams, not outside of it. You need to recognize what the issues are, and by recognizing it, leadership then needs to have a vision. The people need to be inspired by what can be accomplished and what they can be a part of. If my leaders are just being complicit or not moving forward, or just their promises or commitments are empty, why do I want to be there? Why do I want to put in any work as well? Yeah.
And so I think we've basically come to the end of the conversation, but I wanted to touch on something that Vanessa said quickly, which is that you called it sponsorship. Some people call it allyship. I call it advocacy. I think that this whole allyship garbage has to go because people are patting themselves on the back for doing the basic things that they're supposed to do. If you're actually an advocate, you stand in front and you provide opportunities and pull people up where you can without looking for something in return or some vote on your side in meetings or whatever the case may be. You know, and the other thing that I want to say in terms of retention is we have an incredible panel here who I believe have the potential to say so much more than's being said. I noticed that organizations, I was scouted for something recently, want strong individuals, but don't like strong individuals when those strong individuals speak up. And so there is an understanding on my part. Nobody has said this, so nobody should be punished for it. And punished is a ridiculous concept, but that there could have been more said had the Black voices on this call not necessarily felt that there may be retaliation. And so in a lot of, not necessarily even on this call, but in all 9 episodes, that they feel that it's necessary to mute themselves in order to remain within the confines of the organizational structure and not rock the boat or be the angry Black woman or be the angry Black person, or be the person who doesn't fit in with corporate culture. So that is something that I am saying personally, and I don't work for anybody. So, you know, that I am saying that is potentially a huge issue in these corporations, and it's costing you guys a lot of money because you have talented, incredible Black talent, redundant, that could be doing more if they were allowed to have a voice. So I want to throw to Click, and you know, I think we should take some questions and then we'll chain it up.
Yeah, I think we answered a lot of these questions already. I think I would look through, but I mean, there is one question. Do you feel that there's barriers of Black people, there are barriers for Black people in regards to getting funding grants for music in Canada? If so, how can we change this?
Well, yeah, of course. If the funders also are struggling to have diverse employees, then they're going to not understand the music, if that's what we're talking in this case, the music that you're putting out, and therefore the experience is not recognized, and so the funding is not given.
Okay. I'm seeing a very interesting question, actually, and this is one that I want to speak to as well. If an organization was providing an information session or training led by a third party or on EDI or unconscious and conscious bias, would you feel comfortable being a part of it? And should it be voluntary? So this is a question I'd love to hear your thoughts on, and I'm going to touch on it after you guys finish. Organizations throwing information sessions on diversity and inclusion, etc. Should these things be mandatory at these companies?
Yes,
Definitely.
100%.
And the reason, I guess that says it all, but the reason I asked this is because I realized that there's a lot of window dressing going on. There's a lot of organizations that are doing these things, and they're lunchtime things, and they are not mandatory. And people, you know, and I said to somebody the other day, I called a friend and I said, you know, and I said, I think I said on the last episode, I was like, you know, good white people are watching, but smart white people are watching too. You know, because they should be, and because then they'll understand what the issues are and they can make more money. But I find that there's also a narrative in this industry where there are people who are Black adjacent, who know Black people or speak to Black people or whatever the case may be, and don't feel it necessary to go to diversity and inclusion or watch things or listen to anything because they already know what it is that we're saying. You know, so I think that that's an answer to your question. Would you guys feel comfortable going to those things? Would you be a part of it, or should?
I would personally love to be at those things. I mean, I think we all have something to learn about bias, and it's ingrained. We all have bias. It's not something to be ashamed of, but it is something to learn about. Once you're aware of it, you can do something about it. And just to touch on your point earlier about whether it should be mandatory or voluntary, I mean, the people who don't attend are often the ones who need it. So yeah, it should be mandatory. And also the organizations who are throwing these events or seminars need to be, there should be a section of that where they are open to hard conversations, and they should be open to getting feedback from their staff once that's done. It should not be a one-way conversation, because guaranteed there are people on your staff who have had experiences, whether with your company or a different company, that can be improved upon. And if we can have those hard conversations, we can make changes, but you have to be open to it. So just running the discussion as a one-way, conversation isn't where it should not end there. It doesn't, that's performatory. It doesn't do anything beyond, a lunch break. So I think it needs to be a little bit more of a process, has to be mandatory, and it kind of has to come from the top down.
Not to mention that when it is one way, I was in a conversation the other day with a team at work, and they said that they would have it run while they were doing their work, or because nobody's mandating this. And they definitely recognized it's needed. They think they know, but they were not willing to be engaged. So if there's no conversation that happens afterwards, then a lot of these trainings can just run the video and it shows complete to your HR. But really, did you take it in is the question.
Yeah, I think self-acknowledgement is part of the process of coming to a resolution across all of the racial indiscretions and microaggressions that are within all of the companies, right? So if there is the ability to just watch a video and hit complete and not have an interaction, it defeats the purpose. There has to be an interaction. It has to be a hard moment. It has to be that difficult conversation you didn't want to have, and maybe even for corporations and companies that are large scale, breaking them down into individual groups of whether that's 4 or 6 people, where you're forced to interact and engage amongst the group that you're allocated to, and talk about, what you're seeing, what you've done yourself, what you want to change, and solutions.
I think that's a really good workshop type of scenario. I did something similar like that actually Terry McBride had created. I can't remember the name of the actual workshop right now, but he put us all into small rooms, and I think the biggest thing I walked away from that was not just new friends and allies and people that I can really connect with in the industry, but I left with a new insight on my own, how I do my business and how I can run my business, It's very similar to what you're talking about. We have 2 more questions here. One is came off of Facebook. Can you discuss how clubs and venues actually can do better? We did have a whole panel, a whole discussion on live, but I would love to hear from you guys what your perspective is on in regards to how the club scene, and especially, we all know how challenging that is in this country with lack of Black people in those spaces. Is it pretty much just transferable of everything that we've been talking about kind of goes right into the same thing?
I think Ian has a lot to say in this space because he's had to deal with it firsthand, and
Yes.
that's why he's laughing.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything. It is the stigma that surrounds any and all Black musics, from reggae to hip hop to soca to Afrobeat, anything that is associated with Black people. There is a love of Black culture, but not Black people. There is the fact that, again, representation matters. So if there are not people who either know Black people or are Black people in these spaces, then those stigmas come into place in their decision-making processes. There is bias. There is, extreme increases in room rentals for Black events. There's higher insurance. There is lack of sponsorship. There is, I think this one kind of just goes on and on and on. There is, oh, you're eloquent for a Black person, Ian, but you're not really Black. You're light-skinned. I'm darker than you. There is, we don't want that baga baga music. Like there's all of these different things. There are misconceptions. Black people don't drink. There, you know what I mean? Like when we understand and appreciate every form of celebration, we drink more everything than everybody at every possible thing, from weddings to clubs. You don't want to get me started on this.
Mm-hmm. Well, another question is, what is the biggest challenges you see Black women facing in the industry in the next 2 to 3 years?
Great question.
I mean, I think that with COVID, we're just not seeing roles open. So that hurts everyone, every young, talented person wanting to get into the industry when there's just going to be a lack of jobs in the next 2 to 3 years. So even with mentorship, sponsorship, and some of the things we talked about today, you know, we want to be giving Black women their coins. So I think that's going to be a huge problem.
So I see a very interesting question as well, and it speaks to a point. The question is, what are the boundaries or limitations that need to be considered? Because many times in these organizations and corporations, Black women are supposed to solve the problems. They're expected to solve the problems. So what do you think the limitations and boundaries that need to be, I'm not exactly sure what they mean, but the limitations and boundaries that need to be considered in terms of the fact that they always look to you guys to solve the problems?
I think that's almost a personal, something you need to look at personally, you know, like how much can you really take on? A lot of women are raising families and have their house life, personal lives, then also are going to working their day job to then also be pulled into the direction of join these diversity committees to also tackle the racism that's happening in our corporation. Like at a certain point, you're gonna have burnout, you're gonna be tired, your mental health are all things that you need to consider. So you have to really set those, you have to recognize what your boundaries are yourself. Like, can you take this on? Do you want to take this on? You know, this isn't an obligation. And then really in upholding your boundaries. When management is coming and seeking your advice or wanting you to work later or take calls in the evenings, it's kind of saying, no, I don't have to do this. I don't want to do this. This isn't a part of my job description. And I will not partake.
So I think we've pretty much come to the conclusion, but I have a final question for you all as Black women. Do you find that you feel that you carry the responsibility of speaking on behalf of the entire Black community when you're the only person in your spaces?
Yes. I would say in my particular situation, I don't anymore. I did, but definitely since Blackout Tuesday, a lot of people in the organization have done their own homework. And what they come to me for is potentially to say, I didn't know, but also they'll come to have further discussion as to what they've read or what they've learned, which I welcome. I would rather us have a conversation about how I feel because I'm a person and I can't speak for all the Black women and I can't speak for all the Black people. You know, in some cases it's about hair. I change my hair all the time. I want you to recognize I change my hair all the time because I put effort into my hair, but not everybody is like that. And I make sure that they recognize that not everybody wants you to point out their hair. I add color to my hair. So tell me my hair matches my shirt. I did that on purpose, but from the standpoint of having to speak for everybody, thankfully, I have not had to do that in recent times.
I think I'm the polar opposite, where we've had conversations because there is representation in our company that not one voice is a singular voice for all of us. So in having the conversation, definitely taking into account that there is value in having the individual conversations across the variety of people, because my experience is not that of my colleagues, and my colleagues' experience is not that of mine. So, you know, appreciating what is being said by each individual team member versus taking one person's account and applying it across the board.
And I think as we conclude, just to reiterate, we are not homogenous. That is the reason that across the 9 episodes, we have picked a diversity of voices, a true diversity of voices, as much as possible across the country and from different areas of the industry, and you know, from different mindsets. And with that said, thank you guys all so much. This has been the 9th episode of Breaking Down Racial Barriers. We return next week for the finale, the big one, where we draw conclusions and start to draft some solutions en route to the final report. The purpose of this entire exercise was to have the myriad of Black voices from across our music and entertainment industry, so that we could come up with actionable solutions for organizations and corporations in the music industry to change things at a structural level. So we will be working on that report, but next week we come back with the final episode. And Click, anything else? Okay.
Oh. just want to thank all of y'all for taking your time tonight with us, and it's really much appreciated. Thank you.
And that was Breaking Down Racial Barriers. Matt, take us out. Peace.
Weekly